I do not see my employers laying off American workers in order to file an H-1B petition and, the cheap foreign labor idea. That is not what is happening for the vast amount. We know for certain that it will impact individuals who have a petition filed on their behalf after September 21st, 2025. We also know that it impacts individuals who are outside the US. So most of the individuals that would be impacted by this are going to be filing in the lottery next April. So for companies that are sponsoring individuals from outside the US. So it might be some time between now and then. We might see some litigation that blocks it. In the meantime, it does appear to impact nonprofit cap-exempt entities that might be filing for someone right now who's outside the US. So these are going to be your universities, your hospitals, nonprofit research organizations that are sponsoring, researchers, professors, and that sort of thing that they often sponsor while they're outside the US. They appear to be subject to it. We have not heard of anyone having to pay it yet. We do know that there's going to be some sort of exemption given to either individuals, companies, or an entire industry. None of that has happened yet, so we don't know. There's been discussion of maybe physicians being exempt. There's no process for making the payment of the fee. We don't know who is going to be receiving the fee, who's going to be in charge of the oversight, what they're going to do with it. The big questions right now also are, because it's clear that it applies only petitions filed after September 21st, so that is petitions starting this past week, will it impact individuals who currently are in the US and filing their renewal, filing a change of employer transfer petition, filing an amendment petition? They don't have to pay it now because they're inside the US, but what if they later travel? Are they going to be asked to make this payment in order to get back into the US? That's a big question. I reached out personally to USCIS on that. They responded saying that they have forwarded my questions to their higher ups and that they'll get back to me once they have a response. So hopefully we'll be getting more guidance, but still a lot of questions on it. Yeah, and it was absolutely rightful panic. We sent out emails to our employers letting them know the same thing because, number one, in the press conference, we have Commerce Secretary Lucknick saying that this is going to be taking effect immediately. It's going to apply to all H-1Bs, and it's going to apply every year for the next 6 years. So everyone's thinking it's going to apply to everyone. Then we get the actual proclamation, which makes it very clear that it's an entry ban. So it applies to everyone who's outside the US, and the effective date is September 21st. What they did not specify in the proclamation is whether this impacted people who already had visas. So people who have been on H-1B for years, have petitions already filed and approved, have the visa stamp, and happened to be outside the country when the proclamation language actually came out, it looked like it applied to them because they were outside the country and it was after September 21st before they could get back. Later, we started getting tweets from different people within the administration claiming that, oh no, it was never intended to impact anyone who currently has an H-1B. This is for new H-1Bs. And so only then were we comfortable with people traveling back into the US after that date or leaving the US. But those few hours, yeah, it was panic because we're thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to have employees who are stuck outside the country and have no way to get back unless we get an exemption, which we don't know the process or timing for, or unless we fork over $100,000 bribe, basically is what it feels like. I do. I mean, I think that, the Trump administration clearly favors people who have money. The gold card is a great example of that. We're going to give you a green card if you pay us a gift of $1 million. So yeah, I think it's, there's definitely different ways to term it, but it feels very much like a penalty or a bribe to get yourself back into the country. I work on these visas all the time. Is there abuse? Yes, there's some. That's going to happen in any federal government benefit program. There's always going to be fraud and abuse, and there always needs to be enforcement of that. However, by and large, this is a useful visa. Companies need it. They need access to the talent. Every day I hear from employers saying, I have been posting this job for 6 months and we're just not getting any response. This person is the only person that we feel is qualified. They need a visa. What do we do? That is a common occurrence every day. I do not see my employers laying off American workers in order to file an H-1B petition and, the cheap foreign labor idea. That is not what is happening for the vast amount of companies. And there are laws against it. If that is happening, it needs to be enforced. It should be stopped. So I don't know why they're allowing such fraud and abuse to happen if they're thinking that it's so rampant, but I don't think it's that rampant. Right now, a lot of people are claiming that Americans are being replaced by foreign workers. In the executive order itself, it was referring to Microsoft without saying Microsoft, that they laid off X thousands number of people and turned around and sponsored X number of thousands of H-1Bs. And that they claim is abuse, which is not accurate because there is no data showing that those are one-to-one. They could have laid off all of their accountants and be hiring 10,000 software engineers. That doesn't mean they're replacing American workers with H-1B visa holders. The type of abuse that's most common really is bad actor companies that are, gaming the system by, we saw it a lot during the electronic registration process, working together, colluding with other companies to register the same person multiple times in order to improve their chances. Filing H-1B petitions for speculative employment where there really isn't a job offer at the time of filing. They wait until they get the approval, the person gets here, and then they try to find them a project after the fact, which is not allowed. They're doing benching of employees when they don't have a project without pay, which is also not allowed. Those are the types of problems that are there. We're seeing, sometimes H-1B workers are not paid properly, not following the LCA that was filed, waiting longer periods to pay than what they're allowed to do. And those things should be enforced. But the idea that there's just this huge amount of companies that are replacing Americans with H-1B workers is just not accurate. Yeah, I think, especially when we're talking about abuse of the H-1B worker, for example, by not getting paid properly or being benched without pay, the worker often doesn't want to complain because if they complain, the employer is going to retaliate and put them out of status. Now, there are provisions to prevent that from happening, but they're very scared. They don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize their status, so they just take the abuse. So if they're not making a complaint, how is the Labor Department going to know to investigate those employers? I don't think so. I think, again, we need to figure out exactly who it applies to. If it, in fact, is an entry ban, which the president's power to issue this proclamation comes from the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 212F, which is an entry ban, that means it cannot be applied to anyone who's inside the U.S. And if they're claiming it only applies to new H-1Bs, where they're filing in the cap in the lottery next year, about half of those or less are filed for people who are outside the U.S. So there are plenty of people in the U.S. You have students on F1 with OPT who didn't get selected last year or even the last 2 years. You've got new graduates coming out. You've got people on H-4 EAD. You've got people on L1, L2. All types of people are eligible to change their status to H-1B by going through the lottery. And if they implement the proclamation as it's written, it would not apply to them. So those people can still get an H-1B without going through paying this $100,000. So yes, it will impact companies that are bringing in talent from abroad, but it doesn't impact companies that get their talent from here, which I think is why some of the American big tech companies are supposedly, according to Trump, happy with it, because it cuts out the competition for talent. They're able to get all of those slots because slots aren't going to companies that are bringing people from outside the US. That is how I read it. Okay. I think that is the accurate reading of it. Okay. We are still awaiting guidance for certain on that, but it is an entry ban. So how can you apply it to someone who's not trying to enter the US because they're already here? So I don't think it applies to any of those cases where they're in the US filing a change of status. It definitely does. So a lot of people don't like the fact that you don't have to, only certain employers have to try to recruit a US worker before they can proceed with sponsoring a foreign worker. As of now, that's only required for the labor certification process for the green card. For H-1Bs, that's only required if it's an H-1B dependent employer. However, those H-1B dependent employers can get out of doing this recruitment step if they pay the worker at least $60,000 a year or the worker has a master's degree. $60,000 is too low of a bar. That was set a really long time ago. I can't remember the last time I filed an H-1B petition for someone being paid less than $60,000. So practically everyone qualifies to be exempt, which means companies technically are not required to recruit a US worker before they can file. So that wage level, that basic wage amount needs to be increased, but only Congress can do that. Other reforms, I think, a lot of people would say that, we have too many H-1Bs. I disagree with that. I think the cap is too low. It was set at a time before the internet even existed. It has not kept up with our economy. And the harder we make it for companies to be able to get the talent that we need, the more likely they're going to move those jobs abroad, move the companies abroad where the talent is. So I think we should raise the cap on H-1Bs. If we didn't have this cap, we wouldn't have this crazy lottery system where we now have to try to do it based on wage level according to the new regulation that was proposed. Otherwise, we're choosing who gets a visa based on a random lottery. That's just a ridiculous way to operate a powerhouse country like America. I would say that the recruitment should be required of everyone, regardless of salary. If you wanted to set one, I don't know, make it 100,000, make it 150,000. It should be a higher number, again, to encourage companies to try to find a US worker first. As I said, I think my companies, most of them are trying to find US workers and can't, but that would at least add an extra enforcement provision to where if a company is not doing that, if we stick with the H-1B dependent employers are the only ones that have to do it unless they meet a certain wage level, then there can be more enforcement of those companies if they're not paying. Either we're going to get higher wages or we're going to see more enforcement because the wage level has increased. I would say let the market decide and not have one. I mean, okay. We have lots of other visa categories that don't have a cap. And, I don't hear, yes, there are a lot of anti-immigrant people that claim all visas are bad. But in general, you don't hear a lot of people complaining that an L1 person stole my job or an O1 person stole my job or a TN stole my job. And none of those has a cap. So why do we need it on an H-1B? The gold card is an interesting one because when it was first announced, it was you pay $1 million, you get a green card plus extra benefits, that you don't have to pay taxes on your worldwide income. And there was nothing specified about where these green cards come from, that they're going to be part of the existing EB 1, 2, 3, 5 categories. And of course, we already had sold 20 of them somehow, even though the project didn't exist yet. Now we actually have some more information that is telling us, number one, there is no tax benefit if you get a gold card. You still have to pay taxes just like any other green card holder would. And number two, the gold card comes from EB1A and EB2 national interest waiver category. So your $1 million gift to the United States is proof of your extraordinary business ability, or proof that your work is in the national interest. Sounds fine, except that EB2 category, if you're from India, why am I going to pay $1 million to sit in a line that's 80 years long? That is ridiculous. And even EB1A for India has a backlog, so there's a wait. So I'm going to pay $1 million and sit here and wait for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and then finally go through the process. And then what if I'm denied? No, so you're going through the regular EB1, EB2 process, which means you have to wait until your priority date becomes current.
So
a visa, exactly. A visa has to be available, and you go through the same adjustment of status process as anybody else. It means the same vetting as everybody else, the same medical exam. So it's definitely not automatic. So if you don't qualify for adjustment of status for one of the many reasons that they could deny, and they end up denying, your $1 million gift is a gift. It's gone. You can't get it back. Well, the current backlog is what, 3-4 years? And that's going to, I can only imagine that's going to get worse over time. I think they want to raise money. Supposedly this is to help with the deficit, help with the budget, that sort of thing, which to an extent makes sense. But it also doesn't come with any kind of job creation requirement like the EB5 does. So the EB5 is almost the same amount, but those people, they're investing their money and they have to prove they're creating US jobs. And so we're actually getting an economic benefit from that investment. Now the green card holder can eventually get that money back, which is different from the gold card, because they won't get that money back, but there's no requirement that $1 million does anything to promote US job creation. I think they are exploring options right now. They're looking at, as there's a prevailing wage regulation that will change how the lottery is conducted if it happens next year. So they're looking at the roles that they might or might not sponsor for, to determine if they want to proceed with any filing that might be for someone with a level 1 wage, where their chances of selection are going to be very low. They might look at reworking job descriptions and salary bands in order to increase the wage level so that they have the higher chance of getting selection, which I think would ultimately, that would help the Trump administration's plan of raising wages for H-1B workers. So you can't be saying that this is cheap foreign labor if everyone's being paid more that's on an H-1B. They're also looking at alternatives. If I want to sponsor someone, should I maybe look at an L instead, make sure they qualify for that? Can I do an O1? Are they Canadian or Mexican citizens to where I could get a TN instead? Or maybe I should send them to my office in Canada. Maybe I can send them to my location in Ireland, send them outside the US so where they don't have to worry about it anymore. So they're starting to think about these things in case that they won't have access to the H-1B for certain employees going forward. If you can't get the workers where you need them to be, you move to where the workers are. We've already seen, how many of the top companies that use H-1Bs also have huge offices all over in India, with huge amounts of workers there. It's not going to be that difficult for them to continue hiring there instead of in the US. Yeah, especially, I mean, a lot of the H-1Bs that we file for tech companies, the beneficiaries work from home. So if they're working from home in the US, why can't they work from abroad doing the same job? Oh, it's definitely a way, anything immigration is pushed by Stephen Miller as Trump's main advisor, and he is very anti-immigrant. all all immigrants, not just undocumented. I think Trump ran a lot in his campaign about we're going to clean up the illegal immigrants and that sort of thing and get out the worst of the worst and go after the criminals. We all attorneys knew that that's not where it's going to stop because we knew who's really behind it, and that's Stephen Miller. That's Project 2025, which very clearly is targeted at reducing all immigration. So it's definitely meant to play to the Trump administration's base, move forward with the types of things that Stephen Miller wants to do to limit immigration. I have no idea. I assume he's got family at some point who immigrated into the US, whether legally or not. I don't know. Maybe he was, his whole family is Native American. I really don't know. I highly doubt it. No idea why. Yeah, very shocking. And you've got, during the campaign or towards the end of it, Elon Musk becomes very involved and they're great friends. And obviously, he's an immigrant. We've got so many top companies that are run by immigrants. It just does not make a lot of sense that they would be so anti-immigrant when they're, and Trump uses immigration himself at his properties. He's using non-immigrant visas. Yeah, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I do think that will happen. Yeah, I think that it will. I heard a lot during the first Trump administration. I'm starting to hear it again, particularly from Indian immigrants who are just sick of waiting in the backlog, sick of having to go through so many hurdles for every little thing they want to do. How many times do I have to be fingerprinted? How many interviews do I need to go through? How many times is my status going to be threatened, which then threatens the status of my dependents? And it's just too much stress, too much difficulty. Why are we doing this? So they just are thinking of going back. On top of that, you will have, if this $100,000 fee takes effect, you'll have fewer people leaving India to come into the US on new H-1Bs. So yeah, I think it will be a reverse brain drain where people are moving back to India or staying in India, and then the US is going to lose talent because of it, because people are going to, even if they don't move to India, they're definitely going to seek out other countries instead of the US being their top choice. I mean, if you're a startup, funding is limited and you want to be using that funding on your talent, on building your product, and you don't have the extra $100,000 lying around to be able to pay this fee to get an H-1B worker. And so again, if you can't get the worker here, you're either going to have them work remotely from abroad or move the work abroad in order to keep going forward. So yeah, I definitely think startups, small companies are going to bear the biggest brunt of not having that access to talent. I think my conspiracy theory is the big companies are likely to get an exemption because they're somehow in the national interest. And so that's why they're not too concerned about it. That's just my conspiracy theory, because with the proclamation, they can give an exemption of the $100,000 fee to an individual employee, which we saw that happen during COVID and those travel bans. We had to ask for a national interest exemption, and they allowed those for people who were managers, executives, people who were working in infrastructure, people who were working in healthcare. But each individual person had to apply to the consulate to get that exemption and wait for them to make the decision in their discretion. This proclamation still allows that, and there's no set guidance on who it would apply to, but it also allows an entire company to be exempt. So why wouldn't Microsoft reach out to the Trump administration and say, hey, all of these people that we want to bring in, they're going to be working on X project and it's in the national interest, so give us an exemption for everybody. Maybe that's why they're not overly concerned about it. I think I guess maybe I misunderstood the question, but I think there's going to be more executive orders in the future. I think for H-1B specifically, this is just the beginning. We saw during the previous Trump administration, really with anything legal immigration, once they started attacking it, it was almost weekly. Every Friday afternoon, it felt like there was a new restriction, a new rule, new type of request for evidence, and that's going to happen again. The attack on the H-1B, this proclamation in the prevailing wage lottery regulation, I think are just the beginning. And so we're going to see over the next 3 years even more coming. Both can be reversed, especially the proclamation. That can be done as soon as a new president's in place. And this proclamation only lasts for 1 year anyway. I think they want to basically see what happens in the next lottery. I think they have to decide around April if they're going to extend it, see if it accomplished what they are hoping it will, which I don't think it will, and then they'll decide from there. But assuming that they've extended it year after year until the next president takes office, the first thing that president can do is sign another executive order that ends it. And that's exactly what we saw happen with President Biden when he came into office. He immediately ended a lot of Trump's presidential proclamations. Now, assuming that the regulation regarding the H-1B lottery goes through, it also can be reversed, but it will take a little bit more work. It has to be done through the regulatory process. So we have to propose a proposed rule, wait for a public comment, come up with the final rule, announce it, and then it would become final. So it's a little more work to undo that. As I said, I think this is just the beginning. I would, even though we know that the proclamation does not apply to people who already had H-1Bs, we are still advising people not to travel outside the US, particularly if you need a visa stamp. And I know that seems a little, maybe too conservative, but this proclamation is a perfect example of how quickly things can change. And you never know when you happen to be outside the US when that next proclamation is going to hit and if it will impact you. And so the safer thing is to stay in the US, because most executive orders, when they're dealing with immigration, they get their power from that 212F entry ban. So it always impacts people outside the US. So if you stay in the US, you're less likely to be impacted and get stuck and not be able to come back to your job.